There's a feeling that gets mistaken for love more often than people realize. It doesn't come with loud red flags. It doesn't always feel toxic in the beginning. In fact, it can feel meaningful, important, even powerful. It's the feeling of being needed. Someone relies on you. They come to you when things fall apart. They need your support, your presence, your effort. You feel like you matter in their life. And for a while, that can feel like connection. But it's not the same as being loved. And confusing the two is one of the fastest ways to lose yourself in a relationship. Because when you're needed, your value comes from what you do. When you're loved, your value comes from who you are. That difference changes everything. And most people don't recognize it until they've already built something around the wrong foundation. Being needed creates a role, not a relationship. When someone needs you, there's usually a function attached to it. You become the one who fixes things, the one who listens, the one who shows up no matter what, the one who holds everything together. And over time, that role becomes your identity in the relationship. You're not just a partner or a friend or someone they care about. You're the solution to their problems. At first, that can feel fulfilling. It gives you a sense of purpose. It makes you feel important. But there's a hidden cost. Because if your value is tied to what you provide, what happens when you stop providing? What happens when you need support instead? In many cases, the dynamic shifts. Not because the other person is intentionally trying to hurt you, but because the relationship was built around what you do, not who you are. And when that's the foundation, it becomes unbalanced. A real relationship doesn't depend on one person constantly giving and the other constantly receiving. It requires mutual presence, not just function. You can be deeply needed and still feel emotionally alone. This is where the confusion becomes clear. You can be there for someone constantly. You can support them, help them, show up for them in every way they need, and still feel unseen, still feel unappreciated, still feel like something is missing. Because being needed doesn't guarantee emotional connection. It doesn't guarantee that the other person understands you, values you, or sees you beyond what you provide. It only guarantees that they rely on you. And reliance is not the same as intimacy. Intimacy involves being known, not just for what you do, but for how you think, how you feel, who you are when you're not performing a role. If that layer is missing, the relationship can feel empty, even if it looks strong from the outside. That's why some people stay in relationships where they are constantly giving but never truly receiving. Because they mistake reliance for connection. If you tie your worth to being needed, you will struggle to set boundaries. This is where it becomes personal. Because for many people, being needed isn't just something they experience. It's something they depend on. It becomes the way they measure their value. If someone needs them, they feel important. If no one needs them, they feel replaceable. And that creates a problem. Because it makes it hard to say no. It makes it hard to step back. It makes it hard to prioritize yourself without feeling guilty. You start overextending, overgiving, overcompensating. Not because you have to, but because part of you believes that if you stop, you might lose your place in that person's life. This is where boundaries become difficult. Because setting a boundary feels like risking the connection. But without boundaries, the connection becomes one-sided. And one-sided relationships don't last in a healthy way. To shift this, you have to separate your worth from your usefulness. You are not valuable because of what you do for others. You are valuable because of who you are. And once you understand that, boundaries become less about pushing people away and more about maintaining balance. Some people don't want a partner. They want support without responsibility. This is, well, another hard truth. Not everyone is looking for a mutual relationship. Some people are looking for stability, support, and consistency. But, without the responsibility of giving the same in return. And if you're someone who naturally gives, who naturally shows up, who naturally supports others, you may attract those people. Not intentionally, but because your behavior aligns with what they're looking for. The problem is, this dynamic can continue for quite a long time before you realize what's happening. Because you're focused on maintaining the connection. You're focused on being there. But you're not always stepping back to ask whether the relationship is balanced. A practical way to assess this is to look at the flow of energy. Are you the one initiating most of the time? Are you the one providing most of the support? Are you the one adjusting, compromising, and showing up more consistently? If the answer is yes, then the relationship may be built more on need than on mutual connection. And that's something you have to address. Love allows space for you to exist beyond what you provide. When someone truly values you, they don't just appreciate what you do. They appreciate who you are. They care about your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. They don't only come to you when they need something. They engage with you because they want to. There's a difference in energy. You don't feel like you have to earn your place. You don't feel like your value is conditional. You can show up as yourself, not just as a role. And that creates a different kind of connection. One that feels stable. Not because you're constantly proving your worth, but because your presence is enough. This doesn't mean the relationship is perfect, but it means it's balanced. And balance is what makes something sustainable. Letting go of being needed can feel a bit like losing your purpose. This is where it gets, difficult. Because if you've built part of your identity around being needed, stepping away from that role can feel honestly empty. You might question your place, your value, your importance. You might feel like something is missing. Not because the connection was healthy, but because it was familiar. And, familiarity creates comfort, even when it's not really aligned with what you actually need. To move through this, you have to redefine what gives you a sense of purpose. Instead of finding it in being needed, start finding it in being aligned. In doing things that matter to you. In building connections that are mutual. In developing a sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation. That shift takes time, but it creates a more stable foundation. Because it's not dependent on someone else's needs, it's rooted in your own awareness. You have to learn the difference between giving and overgiving. Giving is natural in relationships, it's part of connection. But overgiving comes from a different place. It comes from a need to maintain the relationship, to secure your position, to feel valued. And that difference really matters, because giving from a place of balance feels good. Overgiving from a place of insecurity leads to exhaustion. To recognize the difference, pay attention to how you feel. When you give, do you feel grounded and present? Or do you feel anxious, like you need to do more to keep things stable? That emotional state tells you where the behavior is coming from. And once you see that, you can start adjusting, not by stopping giving completely, but by making sure it comes from a place of choice, not obligation. You can't build a healthy relationship if your role is to be needed. At the end of the day, relationships built on need are unstable because they rely on imbalance. One person gives, the other receives. And while that may work for a while, it doesn't create long-term stability, because eventually the person giving becomes drained, or the person receiving becomes dependent, or both. A healthy relationship requires mutuality, both people showing up, both people giving, both people being present, not perfectly, but consistently. And that requires you to step out of the role of being needed, to allow space for something more balanced to develop. The shift happens when you start choosing connection over validation. Being needed can feel validating. It can make you feel important, valued, necessary. But connection goes deeper than that. It's not about proving your worth. It's about sharing your presence. And when you start prioritizing that, your choices change. You become more aware of the dynamics you're in. You start recognizing when something is one-sided. You begin choosing relationships where you don't have to earn your place. And that shift changes everything, because you're no longer operating from a need to be needed. You're operating from a place of awareness. And that's where real connection begins. If this kind of depth is what you're here for, real insight, real understanding, no surface-level distractions, then you already know this work isn't easy, but it's necessary. So if you're ready to stop confusing being needed with being loved and start building something real, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because most people don't realize the difference. And that's exactly why they stay stuck in the wrong kind of relationships.